20,000 years ago, the rhythm of human life was bound tightly to the forces of nature. The people who lived in caves were not primitive in the way we sometimes imagine. Rather, they were skilled survivors, carrying within them generations of knowledge that ensured the continuity of their communities. Each dawn brought with it both promise and peril, and survival depended on the careful balance of courage, intelligence, and cooperation. The first sensation of the day was almost always the cold. Inside the rough walls of the cave, the floor was hard, the bedding of animal hides thin, and the air heavy with the smell of smoke, damp stone, and the mingled scents of earth and drying meat. Children huddled close to their mothers, while the men stirred slowly, listening to the faint crackle of the embers that had smoldered through the night. Fire was the heart of their existence. It had to be preserved, nurtured, and guarded, for without it, warmth, safety, and food were all at risk. Keeping the fire alive was not simply a task, it was a ritual. Older members of the group knew exactly which woods to choose. Oak burned long and steady, birch caught easily and released a pleasant fragrance, and pine was favored for kindling, though its smoke was thick and unsuitable for cooking. To let the fire die completely was an unthinkable failure, for sparking a new flame in the cold darkness could mean hours of hardship and potential danger. Once the fire was fed and the daylight began to creep into the mouth of the cave, the day's true labors began. Hunting and gathering were the pillars of their survival. Hunters prepared stone-tipped spears and carefully sharpened flint blades, testing each weapon for balance and strength. They wrapped themselves in heavy skins, stitched by hand, practical garments shaped to shield them from wind, snow, or rain. The hunters knew the signs of the animals. They sought hoofprints pressed into soft earth, broken twigs, tufts of fur clinging to bark. Reading the forest was as natural to them as reading a book is to us today. Gatherers, often women and younger members of the group, set out in different directions. Their knowledge was encyclopedic, built upon centuries of observation. They could identify edible roots, mushrooms, berries, and nuts, as well as medicinal plants capable of easing pain or reducing fever. Some of this knowledge was born of bitter experience. Someone, long ago, had tested a leaf or a berry and suffered, and the lesson had been passed down orally from generation to generation. Meals were simple but sustaining. Roasted meat, handfuls of nuts, tart berries, sometimes eggs taken from nests, and, on rare and precious occasions, honey. Collecting honey was both a dangerous and celebrated task. Smoke was used to calm the bees, but even then, stings were inevitable. The sweet reward, however, was cherished as both food and medicine, a golden treasure within the otherwise harsh diet. Evenings were not only for rest, but also for work of another kind. Men and women sat together under the glow of the fire, repairing stone tools, sewing garments with bone needles, and twisting fibers into ropes. Children learned by watching, and soon by doing. A boy might be guided to strike flint at just the right angle to shape a cutting edge, while a girl might be shown how to stitch a hide so tightly that no cold air could pass through. Knowledge was not written, but spoken, shown, repeated, and absorbed until it became second nature. But life was not all toil and danger. Around the fire, stories were told, tales of the hunt, of spirits in the sky, of ancestors who still watched over them. The cave walls bore painted images, animals, hunters, symbols whose meanings were half practical and half spiritual. These drawings were not idle decorations. They were teachings, memories, and prayers all at once. The flicker of firelight brought them alive, as if the animals themselves danced across the stone. At night, people lay close together for warmth and safety, listening to the sounds of the wilderness, the crackle of the fire, the whisper of wind at the cave's mouth, the distant howl of wolves. All were part of the nightly symphony. Sleep was guarded. Someone always remained awake, keeping watch, ensuring that danger did not creep too close. These cave dwellers, often dismissed in modern imagination as primitive, lived lives of complexity, intelligence, and depth. Their days were measured not by clocks, but by the cycle of light and dark, hunger and satisfaction. danger, and safety. Every action, whether striking flint, telling a story, or holding a child close, was part of a greater pattern, a life that was at once simple and profoundly meaningful. In their struggles and their triumphs, in their fears and their joys, they were no less human than we are today. Their world was raw and untamed, yet within it they found purpose, community, and a kind of peace unknown to the frantic pace of modern life. As the sun climbed higher into the pale sky, the tasks of survival pulled the community in many directions. Hunting parties moved silently through the forest, their steps cautious and deliberate. Every sound mattered. The snap of a twig could mean the loss of a meal, or worse, it could attract the attention of predators larger and fiercer than themselves. To hunt was to risk everything. Deer, wild horses, and sometimes even mammoths were the prized quarry, though the latter demanded the cooperation of many and the courage of all. Such hunts were not daily events, but monumental undertakings, remembered for years. When a mammoth was brought down, the feast was vast. The hides became clothing and shelter, and the bones were shaped into tools. Every part of the animal was used, a sacred acknowledgement that life fed on life. More often, smaller game was sought: hares, wild goats, or birds caught in cleverly designed traps. Hunters sometimes carried torches, using fire itself as a weapon, driving animals into waiting spears. Yet hunting was always uncertain. Days might pass without success, and hunger gnawed at the group, testing their endurance. While the hunters moved through the wilderness, the gatherers worked tirelessly in their own domain. Women bent over patches of ground, fingers probing the earth for edible roots or bulbs. Children followed, their eyes sharp for berries clinging to low bushes or mushrooms hiding under fallen logs. Each plant was inspected carefully. Some promised nourishment, others concealed poison. To mistake one for the other could bring suffering or death. Among the gatherers were those who knew the healing power of plants. Bark that could dull pain, leaves that soothed wounds, roots that calmed fever. These were treasures as valuable as food. A healer's knowledge was both practical and spiritual. It was believed that the spirits of plants offered protection, and that to use them wisely was to honor the natural world. By midday, the camp stirred with new activity. Those who remained in the cave prepared hides stretched on wooden frames, scraping them clean of flesh and softening them for clothing. Needles made from bone pierced through the thick skins, pulling sinew thread behind them. Each stitch was small, deliberate, and strong. The garments were not beautiful in the way modern fashion is, but they were marvels of craftsmanship, perfectly adapted to keep out the bitter cold. Children, though free to play, were never idle for long. Their games mimicked the world around them. Small boys practiced throwing miniature spears at targets. Girls wove grasses into cords, and together they listened to their elders explain the tracks of animals or the shifting colors of the sky. Education was not confined to lessons, but woven seamlessly into the fabric of daily life. To grow was to learn, and to learn was to survive. As evening approached, hunters returned. Sometimes they carried meat, sometimes only weary expressions. On successful days, excitement rippled through the camp. Fires were stoked higher, and the air filled with the scent of roasting flesh. Even the smallest morsels were shared, each person taking their portion. There was no concept of waste. The bones would later be split to reach the rich marrow inside, a vital source of energy. During the meal, voices rose in gratitude and celebration. Songs were sung, simple chants that echoed against the cave walls. The rhythm of clapping hands or striking sticks carried the music, weaving voices into a communal expression of joy. On leaner nights, the songs were softer, more somber, yet they were still sung. Music, like fire, was a flame of the spirit that no hardship could extinguish. When darkness fell fully, the cave once again became a circle of light against the great unknown. The flickering glow of the fire revealed the painted figures on the walls. The animals drawn their bison, deer, horses seemed alive in the shifting shadows. Some said these pictures carried magic, helping the hunters succeed. Others believed they were lessons for the young, reminders of what to seek and what to fear. The elders told stories as sparks floated upward into the cave's smoky air. Stories of ancestors, of great hunts, of the moon and stars above. Children listened with wide eyes, their imaginations alight. In these stories lived not only entertainment but wisdom, a way of binding the community together across generations. Before sleep, guards were chosen. 2 or 3 would remain awake through the night, tending the fire, listening for the pad of paws or the snap of branches outside. Wolves, bears, and even rival human groups posed threats that could not be ignored. To close one's eyes without such protection would be to invite disaster. And so, wrapped in furs, pressed close to one another, they drifted into slumber, their dreams blending with the sounds of the fire and the whispers of the night. For them, tomorrow was never guaranteed. Yet within each day lived a sense of purpose that gave life meaning. To survive, to protect, and to pass on the flame of knowledge to those who would follow. Great, let's move into step 3. About 600 to 700 words. In this part, I'll take the story deeper into the asterisk spiritual life, dangers, and cultural expressions asterisk of cave dwellers, while continuing the flow of narrative. The life of the cave dwellers was not only about survival of the body, but also about survival of the spirit. Though their days were filled with hunting, gathering, and constant vigilance, there was a deeper rhythm beneath it. All I sensed that life was tied to mysteries greater than themselves. The cave was not just sheltered, it was a sacred place, a gateway between the visible and the invisible. Within the flickering firelight, painted figures on the stone walls spoke silently of this connection. The hunters did not believe, they painted merely for decoration. Every bison, horse, or mammoth sketched with charcoal or ochre was thought to hold power. To draw an animal was to call it into the world, to honor it, or to ask for its spirit's cooperation in the hunt. The act of painting was part ritual, part prayer, part teaching. The placement of these images was never random. Elders knew which parts of the cave carried strange echoes, how a single sound could travel and multiply through the stone. To tell a story there was to give it power. Children were often brought to these places and made to sit quietly, to listen as the stories were spoken and the images explained. In the minds of the young, the cave walls were alive, a vast, breathing memory that held the wisdom of their people. Night, though dangerous, was also a time of meaning. The sky above, when visible, was studied carefully. Stars were not distant suns to them, but guiding lights, patterns of spirits watching from above. The phases of the moon, the shifting constellations, all were signs. The people learned to read them, much as they read tracks on the ground. To the cave dwellers, the heavens spoke in a language as old as time itself. Yet dangers were ever present. The forest was home, not only to prey, but to predators. Wolves prowled the edges of camp, their eyes glowing in the dark, waiting for weakness. Bears could storm into a clearing without warning, their massive bodies capable of scattering hunters with ease. Even more feared were encounters with rival human groups. Strangers could mean trade, but they could also mean violence. And in a world where resources were scarce, conflict was never far away. For this reason, cooperation within the group was sacred. The bonds of family and community were stronger than stone. When one fell ill, others cared for them with herbs and warmth. When a child cried, it was not only the mother who soothed them, but also aunts, grandmothers, or siblings. Knowledge was shared freely. Selfishness was dangerous. Generosity was survival. Among them, certain figures stood apart. The healers, with their deep understanding of plants and remedies, were regarded with respect. The storytellers, who remembered the lineage of ancestors and carried the memory of the people in their voices, held a similar reverence. Sometimes these roles overlapped in the same persons. Someone who knew how to heal wounds and also how to heal spirits through words and song. Music itself was a kind of medicine. Flutes made of bird bones, drums carved from stretched hides, and the rhythm of clapping hands or striking stones turned the cave into a chamber of sound. The music could stir courage before a hunt, calm fear during storms, or lift spirits when food was scarce. It was said that the beat of a drum echoed the beat of the human heart, connecting everyone in its rhythm. Children were immersed in this cultural life from the beginning. They learned not through formal teaching, but through participation. A child might be given a small stone to shape, a stick to carve, or a song to repeat. They made mistakes. Of course, stools shattered, stitches loosened, songs forgotten. But mistakes were not punishments. They were lessons. Every failure was a step toward mastery. Every effort a contribution to the shared survival of the group. As the seasons shifted, the challenges changed. Winters were harsh, with freezing winds that howled through the valleys and drove animals into hiding. Food grew scarce, and the group relied on preserved meat and the memory of better times to endure the hunger. Summers, though easier, brought their own danger storms, floods, and rival bands seeking the same fertile grounds. Yet through it all, the cave dwellers endured, adapting with a resilience that spoke of the deep bond between human beings and the natural world. To live in such times was to accept constant uncertainty, yet within that uncertainty lay meaning. For the cave people, every moment mattered. The tending of a fire, the sharing of food, the telling of a story, the drawing of a line upon stone. Their existence was fragile, yet profoundly human. They were not merely surviving. They were building the foundations of memory, knowledge, and culture that would echo through the millennia to come. And though they could not know it, their footsteps, their songs, and their paintings were the first whispers of the long story of humanity, a story that would stretch far beyond their caves, into the vast expanse of history. The cave was their home, yet it was never a permanent one. The people of 20,000 years ago lived with the rhythm of the seasons, moving when the land demanded it. They knew that the earth gave generously in one place and then withdrew, pushing them to seek new hunting grounds, new rivers, or new caves. Migration was not aimless. Wandering it was guided by memory, by landmarks, and by the wisdom passed down through generations. In spring, when rivers swelled with melted snow and forests sprouted green shoots, the people followed the animals that emerged to graze. Herds of deer, bison, and wild horses were their lifeline, and tracking these herds meant life or death. Families packed what they could carry: furs for warmth, stone tools carefully wrapped in hides, bone needles and sinew for sewing, and bundles of dried meat and berries for the journey. The strongest carried the heaviest loads, but even children had their share, clutching small bundles of wood or skins as they walked. Summer brought abundance. Berries ripened on bushes, rivers swarmed with fish, and the forests buzzed with life. It was during this season that children learned most actively. They played near shallow streams, mimicking their elders by trying to catch fish with their bare hands. Elders sat in the shade, teaching the young how to twist fibers into ropes, how to recognize edible plants, and how to sharpen flint. Old age was rare, but those who survived into their later years carried immense respect. They were living libraries of memory, the keepers of stories, hunting techniques, and healing knowledge. Autumn was a time of preparation. The hunts grew more urgent, and the gathered foods were dried or smoked for preservation. Fires smoked constantly, their haze drifting through the camp as strips of meat hung on wooden racks. Women worked tirelessly to scrape hides into softer leathers, sewing them into cloaks, boots, and coverings against the coming cold. Children joined in the tasks, even if only to fetch water, collect firewood, or help scrape bones for marrow. Winter was the greatest test. Winds howled, snow blanketed the earth, and food grew scarce. The people withdrew into caves, bundling close around the fire. Meals became smaller, stretched carefully so that every mouth could be fed. Hunger sharpened their senses, but also their unity. It was in winter, when days were short and the nights long, that storytelling became most important. Around the fire, elders recited tales of past hunts, of ancestors who had survived even harsher winters, of spirits that guided the people. For the children, these stories were comfort, but they were also lessons. A reminder that survival depended not only on strength, but on wisdom and cooperation. In these cycles of migration and return, innovation quietly took root. The people were not idle. They experimented constantly. Stones were shaped into sharper blades, and with practice, they learned to strike flint at just the right angle to produce a durable, cutting edge. Wooden shafts were hardened in fire to create stronger spears. Fibers twisted together became ropes that could bind, carry, or set traps. The discovery of new techniques was never a single moment of genius, but the result of countless small experiments, repeated failures, and collective memory. Fire itself, once a fragile miracle, became something they mastered. They learned to keep embers alive during travel, carrying them in bundles of bark or moss so that a flame could be rekindled quickly. With fire, they cooked, kept predators at bay, and shaped tools. But fire also carried meaning beyond survival. It was a symbol of life itself, its warmth a reminder of community, its light a boundary against the darkness. Though survival was harsh, their lives held richness. Festivals were not unknown to them, moments when a successful hunt or a safe return from migration was celebrated with dance and song. The people stamped their feet on the ground, clapped hands, and lifted voices in chants that echoed through the valleys. For a brief time, hardship was forgotten, replaced by joy, laughter, and the powerful sense of belonging. Children grew up in this environment of constant challenge and constant learning. A child of 10 could already identify tracks, build a fire, and weave simple ropes. By adolescence, they joined the hunters or became skilled gatherers. There was no separation between childhood and adulthood as we know it today. Responsibility arrived early, and every hand was needed. Yet within this, there was still room for play, for curiosity, and for the wonder of discovering the world. Elders, though fewer in number, were the heart of the group's continuity. They had seen seasons of hunger and abundance, encounters with enemies, and alliances with friends. Their memories were the maps that guided migrations, the recipes for medicines, the rituals for honoring the dead. Though their bodies weakened, their voices carried strength. When an elder spoke, the cave fell silent, for everyone knew that in their words lived the past, and through their words, the future was secured. Thus the cycle continued, year after year, season after season. Life was never easy, yet it was filled with meaning, in their struggles and their creativity, in their migrations and their memories. These cave dwellers laid the groundwork for something much larger than themselves. The first steps toward the great story of civilization.